My name is Isaiah Thomas, and I am 72 years old. My daughter and her husband thought I was just a senile old man who had outlived his usefulness. They sold my house right out from under me for nearly $1 million, with a plan to ship me off to a nursing home the moment the ink was dry. What they didn't know is that their brilliant real estate deal was the final move in a 40-year-old chess game, and they just handed me a $25 million checkmate. Before I continue my story, I would love to know where you are watching from, so please tell me in the comments below. And hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that a family's foundation should be built on respect, not real estate. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my old armchair, the one with the worn fabric that held the faint scent of my late wife's perfume, when Simone called. We talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular, the weather, her job. The usual shallow conversation we'd been having for years. When we said our goodbyes, I heard the click of her hanging up, but the line didn't go dead. She hadn't disconnected the call properly. For a moment, there was just silence. Then I heard her voice, clear as a bell, speaking to her husband, Preston. Her tone was different now. Cold, businesslike. "He has to go to a nursing home, Preston. It's the only way." I heard his smooth, confident voice reply, "I know, baby, but we have to handle it delicately." He bought the story about us managing his finances. The house sale is the last piece. Once that $970 is in the bank, we can find him a nice, clean room somewhere, and this will all be over. I sat there, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the two of them plan the final chapter of my life as if they were discussing a quarterly report. I didn't yell. I didn't hang up and call back screaming. The hot flash of anger I expected never came. Instead, a profound and terrifying coldness settled over me. It was the calm of a battlefield after the first cannon has been fired. I gently placed the phone back in its cradle. The click was the only sound in the silent house. In that moment, the loving father, the gentle retired teacher, was gone, and in his place, a strategist was born. My grief for the daughter I had lost was replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. They had forgotten the most important lesson I ever taught my history students. The quiet ones, the ones you underestimate, are the ones who change the course of the war. That house wasn't just wood and nails to me. It was a fortress Ruby and I had built against a world that wasn't always kind. I was a high school history teacher in Atlanta. She was a community nurse. We didn't have much, but we had a vision. We bought our lot in Cedar Park back when most people were trying to get out. It was a neighborhood filled with hard-working black families, but the city had forgotten us. We saw not blight but beauty, not decline but dignity. I worked a second job as a carpenter on weekends, my hands raw and splintered to make the down payment. I remember laying the foundation myself, Ruby bringing me sweet tea in the hot Georgia sun. Every floorboard, every window frame held a piece of our soul. It was here we brought home our baby girl Simone. It was here I taught her to read. Here Ruby taught her to be kind. We poured every spare dollar, every ounce of our energy into her. We wanted her to have the opportunities we never did. We sent her to a private university a world away from Cedar Park, a world where she met Preston. He was different from the boys in our neighborhood. He came from old money, a family of white real estate developers who saw Atlanta not as a city of people, but as a portfolio of assets. He was polished, charming, and ambitious, and he was utterly captivated by Simone. Ruby had her doubts. She once told me, "He looks at her like she's a beautiful property he wants to acquire." I told her to give him a chance. I wanted my daughter to be happy, and he made her happy. But after Ruby passed, the change in Simone became undeniable. The subtle digs from Preston became more frequent, and Simone's defense of me and our home grew weaker. It started with small things. "You know, Isaiah," Preston would say at Sunday dinner, "the property value in this zip code is stagnant. It's a depreciating asset." At first, Simone would push back. "Preston, stop. This is my father's home." But soon her protests faded into silence. Then her silence turned into agreement. "Dad, Preston has a point," she started saying. "Maybe we should look at a condo for you, something more modern, less maintenance." They spoke of my life's work as maintenance. They spoke of my memories as a burden. The phone call wasn't a betrayal that came out of nowhere. It was simply the final, ugly destination of a journey they had been on for years. They had been chipping away at my foundation for so long they thought it was ready to crumble. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. 3 days after the phone call, they came to me. Preston's six-figure German sedan pulled up to the curb, looking alien against the familiar backdrop of my quiet street. He stepped out first, dressed in a casual but expensive blazer, looking every bit the successful executive. Simone followed her movements, hesitant. She wouldn't look at the house, her eyes fixed on the cracks in the sidewalk, as if she was afraid the memories might reach out and grab her. They sat on the living room sofa, the one Ruby and I had picked out 30 years ago. Preston leaned forward, all feigned sincerity, his hands clasped between his knees. Simone sat beside him, silent, twisting a ring on her finger. Isaiah Preston began, his voice smooth as polished marble. "We're here because we're worried about you. Simone and we've been talking, and we feel that this house, well, it's become a significant liability." I just looked at him, letting the word hang in the air. Liability. He was talking about the place where I had raised my daughter, the place where I had held my wife's hand as she took her last breath, and he called it a liability. "What do you mean, Preston?" I asked, making my voice sound tired, a little shaky. "It's about optimizing your quality of life," he said, the business jargon rolling off his tongue effortlessly. "Right now you have nearly $1 million of dormant equity tied up in this property. That's capital that should be working for you, not sitting in a depreciating asset. The neighborhood is in flux, the maintenance costs are only going to increase. It's a burden, a heavy one for a man in your position." I watched him lay the trap with his smooth words and confident smile. He didn't see a home. He saw a line item on a spreadsheet, a problem to be solved with a sale and a signature. He saw a roadblock on his path to a wealthier future. Simone finally spoke, her voice soft, pleading. "Daddy, we just want you to be comfortable. Think of it. A modern apartment in a retirement community. No more worrying about the roof or the plumbing or cutting the grass. There are activities other people your age. It would be easier." I turned to look at my daughter, my Simone, and saw a stranger. Her eyes were filled with a manufactured concern, her words a script written by the man beside her. She was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. I let out a long sigh, rubbing my eyes as if the conversation was too much for me to process. Equity. Preston. I'm just a retired teacher. I don't understand all that business talk. I looked at Simone, injecting a note of pathetic confusion into my voice. "But Ruby loved this house. We built it together, you know." I saw a flicker of something in Simone's eyes. Guilt. It was there for just a second before Preston cut it off. "And we honor her memory by being practical. Isaiah," he said sharply, his patience wearing thin. "Ruby wouldn't want you rattling around in this big empty house worried about bills. She would want you to be secure. This is the smart move. It's the only move." I let the silence stretch. I watched them, the predator and his accomplice, so certain of their logic, so sure of my weakness. They saw a frail, grieving old man, an easy target. They had no idea they were talking to a history teacher who had studied the art of the long war, who understood that sometimes the greatest victories are won by appearing to surrender. Finally, I slumped back in my chair, a perfect picture of defeat. I'm tired," I whispered, letting my voice crack just a little. "I'm too old to fight this. If you think this is what's best, then I guess you should do what you have to do." Preston's face broke into a barely concealed smile of triumph. He had won. He looked at Simone and gave her a subtle, victorious nod. Simone let out a breath she seemed to have been holding all morning. It was a sound of profound, if misplaced, relief. They thought they had just convinced a confused old man to give up his home. They had no idea they had just willingly, eagerly stepped into the center of my trap. I sat there absorbing the performance. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Every word Preston spoke was a carefully polished stone designed to build a prison of logic around me. He spoke of equity and assets, but I heard inheritance and greed. He spoke of my quality of life, but I heard his desire to be rid of me. He was a shark circling, smelling blood in the water, and he thought I was too old and slow to see the fins. But the real pain came from watching Simone, my daughter, the little girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose nightmares I had chased away. She sat there nodding, her eyes full of a sorrow that wasn't for me but for herself. She was sad that she had to do this, sad that her conscience was pricking her. She wasn't a villain. She was worse. She was a coward. She was trading her father for a lifestyle, and she was trying to call it love. Every word out of her mouth was a betrayal. Every time she said, "Daddy, it's for the best," a piece of my heart chipped away. They thought my silence was weakness. They mistook my weariness for defeat. They couldn't see the historian inside me, the man who had spent a lifetime studying tactics, who knew that the most effective siege is the one your enemy never sees coming. I wasn't just losing a house. I was watching the living legacy of my wife being dismantled by the very person we created it for. And as I looked at their eager, predatory faces, I knew I had to let them win this battle. Because I was no longer fighting to save my house. I was fighting to win the war for my soul, and their arrogance was about to become my greatest weapon. I began the slow, painful process of dismantling a life. Simone had dropped off a stack of flattened cardboard boxes with a roll of packing tape. "Just take your time, Daddy," she'd said, her voice thick with false sympathy. She thought she was giving me time to grieve the loss of my home. In reality, she was giving me time to load my gun. I didn't start with the important things. I started in the living room. My fingers traced the rim of a ceramic vase Ruby had made in a pottery class. It was lopsided and imperfect, and it was the most beautiful thing I owned. I remembered the day she brought it home, her hands still smudged with clay, her face beaming with pride. Preston had once called it clutter. I wrapped it in old newspaper as if it were a priceless artifact and placed it gently in a box. Each object was a ghost. A photograph of Simone on her first day of school, her 2 front teeth missing her backpack almost as big as she was. The heavy history textbook with the broken spine that I had used for 30 years, its pages filled with my handwritten notes. I taught generations of kids about empires that crumbled from within, about betrayals that started with a whisper. I never imagined I would be living through my own personal history lesson. I was methodical. I moved from room to room, not just packing, but searching. I knew what I was looking for, but I couldn't remember where we had put it. Ruby was the one who handled these things, the deep storage of a family's secrets. It wouldn't be in my office desk or in the safe. That was too obvious. It had to be somewhere forgotten, a place of sentiment, not security. Finally, I pulled down the rickety wooden ladder to the attic. The air that greeted me was thick and still smelling of old wood dust and time itself. A single beam of sunlight cut through the gloom from a small circular window, illuminating a universe of dancing dust motes. This was the graveyard of our lives together. Old furniture under white sheets like sleeping giants. Boxes of Christmas ornaments. Simone's old rocking horse, its painted eyes staring into the darkness. I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing on the bare wood planks. I ran my hand along a stack of old vinyl records, feeling the grooves that held the soundtrack of my marriage. I made my way to the far corner behind a stack of my old carpentry tools. And there it was. Tucked away beneath a dusty canvas tarp was a small, dark wooden chest. It wasn't a safe. It was a lockbox Ruby's father had made for her when she was a girl. The wood was cedar, the latch simple brass. My heart began to beat a little faster. This was Ruby's place, a place of secrets. I carried it downstairs, my hands trembling slightly, and set it on the kitchen table. The brass latch clicked open with a soft, familiar sound that echoed across 40 years. I lifted the lid. There was no jewelry, no bundles of cash, just a stack of old photographs, and beneath them a thick, handsome leather-bound folder. It was deep burgundy, the corners worn from age. Embossed on the cover in faded gold leaf were 5 simple words that made the air leave my lungs. Cedar Park Community Trust, established 1985. I ran my thumb over the lettering. It wasn't just a memory. It was real, solid. This was the weapon. This was the foundation they had forgotten. This was the history they had tried to erase. And they had just handed me all the time in the world to read it. My hands, which had trembled with age and grief just moments before, were now steady. I opened the leather folder. The paper inside was thick and yellowed with age, the text typed on an old manual typewriter, the kind with keys that punched the letters onto the page. The first document was the Articles of Incorporation, the Cedar Park Community Trust. I remembered the meeting like it was yesterday. It was in my living room, 1985. The city was selling off abandoned properties for next to nothing, and big developers were starting to sniff around the edges of our neighborhood. Ruby, myself, and 4 of our neighbors, the Coles, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons, we sat right here on this very sofa, and we made a pact. We decided we wouldn't let them pick us off one by one. We were teachers, nurses, mechanics. We didn't have much money individually, but together we had enough. We pooled our savings and formed a legal trust. Our mission was simple: to buy the empty lots and derelict houses on our block before outsiders could. We wanted to preserve the soul of our community. We weren't developers, we were guardians. I turned the page. There were the original deeds, the maps of the parcels of land we had acquired over the years. Lot 241, 243, 249, 251. One by one, we bought them. My little house. Lot 247 sat right in the middle, the crown jewel. Over the years, some neighbors moved away, others passed on. Each time the trust, according to our founding charter, bought out their share. I saw the paperwork for each transaction signed by my friends, countersigned by Ruby or myself. Her elegant looping signature was everywhere. It was a paper trail of our shared dream. Then I reached the final pages. The amendments, the legal updates, the death certificates of my friends, each one attaching their share of the trust to the remaining members. And finally, the last one, Ruby's. My breath caught in my throat. Her share upon her death had transferred solely to me. I read the final paragraph, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. The sole surviving trustee, Isaiah J. Thomas, is granted full and singular authority over all assets and decisions pertaining to the Cedar Park Community Trust. The weight of it settled on me. It wasn't a feeling of joy. It was a cold, hard clarity. My grief for my wife, my sorrow for my daughter's betrayal. It all receded, replaced by the stark reality of the documents in my hands. Preston, with his talk of market values and dormant equity, saw one house on one lot. He was a chess player who could only see one square at a time. He couldn't see the whole board. He was so focused on capturing my little pawn that he failed to realize he was walking his own king right into the path of my queen. They thought they were selling my house, a single property. They had no idea. The house itself, the physical structure of wood and nails, was legally mine. But the land it sat on, the very ground beneath their feet, that belonged to the trust. And I was the trust. They weren't just selling a house. They were trying to sell a single piece of a puzzle. And in doing so, they were unwittingly advertising the value of the entire puzzle to the world. A world of real developers far bigger and more powerful than a small-time predator like Preston. The sadness in my heart wasn't gone, but now it was accompanied by something else, something hard and sharp and focused. It was the feeling of a general long retired who has just been handed the battle plans of an enemy who has profoundly, fatally underestimated him. The game had changed, and I was ready to make my next move. I walked into Marcus Cole's law office the next morning. It was a world away from the cold glass and steel towers Preston inhabited. Marcus's office smelled of old books, leather, and quiet dignity. It was a place where wisdom was valued more than wealth. He was sitting behind a massive oak desk, a mountain of a man with a mind as sharp as a razor. We had been friends since we were 10 years old, and he knew my face better than I did. He stood up, his hand outstretched, a sad smile on his lips. Isaiah, I was so sorry to hear about Ruby. I'm sorry I haven't called. We've all been grieving in our own way, Marcus, I said, shaking his hand. He gestured to the worn leather chair opposite his desk. Sit down, old friend. You look like you're carrying a weight I haven't seen on your shoulders in years. Talk to me. I told him everything. The phone call, the meeting, the cold, calculated way they planned to strip me of my home and my dignity. As I spoke, I watched Marcus's face transform from sympathy to a slow, burning anger. His hands clenched into fists on top of his desk. That silver-tongued parasite, he growled, his voice a low rumble.
And Simone, our Simone, she just sat there and let him.
She helped him, Marcus, I said quietly. He shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He was about to launch into a tirade, but I held up a hand. I reached into my satchel and pulled out the burgundy leather folder. I placed it on the desk between us. The soft thud it made was the only sound in the room. Before we talk about fighting back, I said, I need you to look at this. Ruby. She had me put this away a long time ago. I think she knew a day like this might come. Marcus looked at the folder, his brow furrowed. He slid it closer. His lawyer's curiosity piqued. He opened the cover and I watched him read. His expression shifted from curiosity to intense focus. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the old typed pages. The silence in the room was absolute. Then I saw a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a chess grandmaster who has just discovered a brilliant forgotten strategy. He finally looked up, his eyes shining with a fierce intellectual light. "My God, Isaiah," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Ruby, that magnificent, brilliant woman." He leaned back in his chair, tapping the folder with his finger. "Do you have any idea what this is? This isn't just a document, it's a fortress. It's a checkmate delivered 30 years in advance." He leaned forward again, his voice dropping, filled with a new excited energy. "Preston thinks he's a shark fighting over a single fish. He has no idea he is swimming in an ocean that you own. He's looking at your house lot 247, a property worth just under $1 million. He's completely blind to the rest of it." He gestured to the papers. "This trust, it doesn't just own the land your house is on, it owns the entire block, every abandoned lot, every derelict property. You and Ruby built a kingdom, and no one ever knew." My heart was pounding. "So what does it mean, Marcus?" His smile widened. "It means we don't stop him. In fact, we help him. We let him sell your house. You see, these big development firms like Viridian Dynamics have been trying to acquire the Cedar Park block for a decade, but they could never move forward because they couldn't consolidate ownership from the dozen different names on the old deeds. They didn't know it was all controlled by one forgotten trust." He stood up and began to pace the plan forming in his mind. "Preston, in his infinite greed, is about to do for us what we could never do for ourselves. He's going to clear the title on the most important lot on the block. Yours. His sale is the trigger. It's the key that unlocks the door to the entire kingdom. We will let him do all the work, close his pathetic little deal for $970,000. And while he's off celebrating you and I will be in a different boardroom, we'll be selling the entire Cedar Park Community Trust, a property now made whole by Preston's sale for its true value. We're not talking about 1 million, Isaiah. We're talking about 20, maybe 30 million. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes burning with conviction. "His greed isn't his weapon, my friend. It's his leash. And we are about to pull it." After Marcus laid out the plan, a heavy silence settled in the room. I looked out his office window down at the bustling streets of a city that had changed so much since we were boys. "Ruby always said you were the smartest man in Atlanta." I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "She said if there was a loophole in the devil's own contract, you'd be the one to find it." Marcus let out a soft chuckle, but his eyes were sad. "She was the real strategist, Isaiah. She saw the storm coming when we were all just enjoying the sunshine. This whole trust, it wasn't about money. It was her way of building an ark before the flood." He looked at the burgundy folder on his desk. "She built the ship. We just have to steer it through the storm." I nodded, feeling the truth in his words. We were two old men survivors of a different time fighting a very modern kind of greed. "For her, then," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "we do this for her." Marcus met my gaze, his expression hard as stone. "For her," he repeated, "and for every brick we laid in Cedar Park. Let's give that boy a history lesson he will never forget." The week that followed was a carefully choreographed play, and I was the lead actor in my own tragedy. Preston and Simone moved with a predatory efficiency, their actions cloaked in the language of love and concern. Simone would come by in the afternoons, her car filled with empty boxes, her face a mask of pained sympathy. She would pick up old photographs, her touch lingering for a moment too long. "Oh, Daddy," she'd sigh, holding a picture of herself and Ruby in the garden. "I know this is hard, but think of how happy you'll be in the new apartment. No more worries. We'll visit every weekend, I promise." I watched her handle my memories like they were fragile antiques she was preparing for an estate sale. Each touch was a lie. She wasn't preserving them. She was burying them to make way for a future that had no room for me. I played my part. I would nod slowly, my eyes misty. "I know you're just trying to do what's best, baby girl." I'd say, my voice raspy with manufactured sadness. She would give me a quick, guilty hug, relieved that I was being so compliant, and then continue her work of systematically erasing her own history. The main performance came on a Thursday. Preston arrived with a man in a sharp suit and a leather briefcase. "Isaiah, this is my lawyer, Mr. Davies," he announced, his tone brisk and businesslike. "He has all the paperwork ready. We just need a few signatures to get the ball rolling." They spread the documents across the old oak kitchen table, the very table where Ruby and I had paid our bills, helped Simone with her homework, and planned our entire lives. The stack of paper looked obscene, sitting there, a corporate tombstone on a sacred altar. I put on my reading glasses and squinted at the first page, a dizzying sea of legal text. "That's a lot of words, Preston," I said, looking up with what I hoped was the perfect blend of confusion and exhaustion. "My eyes aren't what they used to be. Can you just tell me what I'm signing?" Preston exchanged a brief, condescending glance with his lawyer. "Of course, Isaiah," he said, speaking slowly as if to a child. "It's all very standard. This is the sales agreement giving us permission to list the house. This is a limited power of attorney allowing us to manage the funds from the sale on your behalf. It's all designed to protect you, to make sure everything is handled properly so you don't have to worry about a thing." To protect me. I had to stop myself from laughing out loud. He was offering me a poisoned cup and telling me it was medicine. I looked from his slick, confident face to my daughter's. She was staring intently at a spot on the floor, unable to meet my gaze. She knew this was wrong. Her conscience wasn't dead, it was just sedated. "It just seems like a lot of power to be giving away," I mumbled, playing my final card of doubt. Preston's smile tightened. "It's about trust, Isaiah. This is what family does. We take care of each other." I picked up the heavy, expensive-looking pen he offered me. I let my hand tremble, a frail old man, overwhelmed by the gravity of a decision he didn't understand. I looked at Simone one last time, my eyes pleading. "Are you sure about this, honey? Is this really what you want?" She finally looked at me, her own eyes swimming with unshed tears of guilt. She nodded a quick, jerky motion. "Yes, Daddy, we're sure. It's for the best." That was all I needed to hear. My hand shook, but my signature was as firm and steady as the day I signed the original deed to this house 40 years ago. With that single stroke of ink, I handed them the shovel. Now all I had to do was wait for them to start digging their own grave. They gathered the papers, their mission accomplished. Preston clapped me on the shoulder with a false heartiness that made my skin crawl. "You did the right thing, Isaiah. You'll see." They walked out, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I looked down at the indentation my signature had left on the blotter paper. It looked less like a signature and more like a declaration of war. As they moved through my house, I became a ghost in my own life. I watched them, not as a father, but as a historian observing the final days of a collapsing dynasty. Every action they took, every word they spoke was another piece of evidence confirming the righteousness of my quiet war. I watched Simone carefully wrap one of Ruby's ceramic bowls, her touch gentle, her eyes sad. But I saw the truth. She wasn't mourning the loss of the object. She was mourning the loss of the person she used to be, the person who would have been horrified by this act. Her guilt was a selfish thing, a balm for her own conscience, not a comfort for my pain. It made her weak pliable in Preston's predatory hands. And Preston. He moved with the restless energy of a conqueror impatient for the spoils. He saw the hand-carved mantelpiece I had spent a month crafting and saw only outdated woodwork. He saw the garden Ruby had cultivated for 40 years and saw only overgrown landscaping that hurts the curb appeal. He was blind, utterly and completely blind to any value that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. His arrogance was a gaping flaw in his armor, and I knew that was where I would strike. When they laid the papers on my kitchen table, my resolve hardened into something akin to steel. He used the word protect. He said this was all to protect me. My wife and I had protected our family with love, with sacrifice, with calloused hands and sleepless nights. He was trying to protect his future with lies and legal documents. He spoke of trust, but the only thing he trusted was the number at the bottom of a page. As I took that pen, my trembling hand was the final piece of the performance. They saw an old man's fear. They didn't see the soldier's steady heart beating beneath. I wasn't signing away my home. I was signing their surrender. I was lighting the fuse. All that was left was to step back and wait for the inevitable glorious explosion. While I was playing the part of a defeated old man, Preston was playing the king on his throne. I know because Simone, in a moment of what she probably thought was kindness, told me about the calls he was making. I can picture him perfectly pacing the floor of his sterile, glass-walled home office, a Bluetooth headset in his ear, his voice buzzing with the electric thrill of a predator who has just made a kill. He was on the phone with his primary investor, a man named Henderson, a man whose money was keeping their lavish lifestyle afloat. "Henderson, my friend, it's done." He'd set his voice a triumphant roar. "The Cedar Park property is officially under our control. We closed this morning. The old man signed everything without a fuss." I can hear the slick, confident tone he would have used, the one reserved for men he considered his equals. It was a delicate situation, as I told you. A lot of sentimental baggage attached to the asset. The father-in-law was a bit of a roadblock, but I managed the situation with the respect and sensitivity it required. In the end, logic won out. He would have paused for dramatic effect, letting the lie settle. The best part: we secured it for $970, an absolute steal. For a property in a neighborhood that's about to explode, it's practically grand larceny. He would have laughed then, a sharp, arrogant sound. He saw his manipulation of a grieving old man not as an act of cruelty, but as a brilliant business tactic. This is the linchpin Henderson. He'd continue, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, sharing the grand vision of a man who can only see a few feet ahead. This house, this lot, it's the first domino. The other owners on that block are all small time. Once they see we've moved in, they'll fall in line. We can consolidate the entire block within 2 years. The real play here isn't the house itself, it's the land. I'm projecting a $5, maybe $6 million valuation once we redevelop. This isn't just a flip, it's the foundation of our new empire. His ignorance was breathtaking. He thought he was a visionary, foreseeing a $5 million potential, completely blind to the $25 million reality he was walking away from. He was a man trying to catch minnows in a bucket while standing on the shore of an ocean teeming with whales. And the old man Henderson would have asked. "Oh, he's taken care of," Preston would have said with a wave of his hand. "We set him up in a nice, clean retirement apartment, safe and sound. He's got enough to live on, and we handle the rest. He's happy. We're happy." Simone is relieved. It's a perfect win-win situation. He hung up the phone, leaned back in his $1,000 office chair, and savored the taste of his victory. He believed he had just secured his future. He had no idea he had just signed its death warrant. The contrast could not have been more stark. While Preston was celebrating in his minimalist glass box of an office, Marcus and I were sitting in a boardroom on the 50th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The room was vast, dominated by a single massive mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the entire city of Atlanta spread out beneath us like a map. This was a room where empires were built and fortunes were made. Across from us sat 2 men in immaculate tailored suits. The man in charge, a sharp, silver-haired executive named Harrison, was the CEO of Viridian Dynamics. His eyes were not greedy like Preston's. They were the eyes of a builder, a man who saw not just lots and numbers but entire city blocks decades into the future. He had a file open in front of him, the same burgundy folder I had found in my attic. "Mr. Thomas, Mr. Cole," Harrison began, his voice calm and measured. "I'll be direct. My company has been trying to acquire the Cedar Park block for 15 years. It's a prime location, a missing piece in our citywide development strategy. But it's been a legal nightmare. The ownership was a tangled web of deceased proprietors and absentee landlords. It was impossible to consolidate. Until my legal team got a flag about a pending sale on one key parcel, Lot 247. He looked directly at me. "Your house, Mr. Thomas." It was the geographical and legal heart of the entire block. Without it, any development was impossible. We've been watching it for years, waiting for it to move. Marcus leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "Mr. Harrison, what you've been watching is the last visible piece of the Cedar Park Community Trust. My client, Mr. Thomas, is the sole surviving trustee. He doesn't just own Lot 247. He holds the deed to the entire kingdom." I watched as a slow wave of understanding washed over Harrison's face. He looked at the folder, then back at me, a newfound respect in his eyes. He had been trying to pick a lock for 15 years, and the man with the only key had just walked into his office. "I see," he said, a slow smile forming. "Well, that certainly simplifies things." He closed the folder. "My team has reviewed the trust documents you sent over. They are ironclad. Viridian is prepared to make a final offer to acquire the entire trust, all assets included. That offer stands at $25 million. The number just hung there in the silent, air-conditioned room. A number so large it felt unreal. A number built on the foresight of a group of ordinary people who just wanted to protect their home. Of course," Harrison continued, "our offer is entirely contingent on a clean title for Lot 247. The private sale currently pending on that property once it closes extinguishes the last independent claim. It makes the trust whole and our acquisition seamless. The moment that sale is finalized, our offer becomes immediately actionable. Preston's moment of triumph was the legal trigger for my own. The irony was so perfect, so poetic, it was almost beautiful. Marcus looked at me ready to accept, but I held up a hand. For the first time, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it filled the vast room. The money is secondary, Mr. Harrison. He looked surprised. Oh, my wife Ruby and I, we didn't build a collection of properties, I said. We built a community. Your plans for development are impressive, but they are missing a heart. The sale is conditional. Your project must include the funding and construction of a new public library and community center on that block. It will be named the Ruby Thomas Library. That is my condition. It is non-negotiable. Harrison didn't even blink. He extended his hand across the table. Mr. Thomas, he said, his voice firm, it would be our honor. You have a deal. We shook hands. And in that quiet, firm handshake, I wasn't just selling land. I was securing my wife's legacy forever. Their victory lap was as loud and vulgar as I expected. I didn't have to imagine it. They broadcasted it for the whole world to see. From the sterile quiet of my small apartment, a place that smelled of stale paint and loneliness, I watched their triumph unfold on my daughter's social media page. The first picture was of two champagne glasses clinking together against the backdrop of an airplane window. The caption read, "Off to our next big adventure, making things happen. #blessed." A day later, a photo of Preston appeared. He was standing on a pristine golf course in Hawaii, the turquoise ocean sprawling behind him. He was smiling a wide, predatory grin, and the caption was pure arrogance. Closing one deal and already planning the next. You don't build an empire by standing still. Work hard, play hard. He was talking about my home, my life with Ruby. He had reduced it to a hashtag, but the one that truly twisted the knife was the photo of him and Simone at a luau. They were wearing leis, their faces glowing from the firelight, smiling as if they didn't have a care in the world. Making new family memories in paradise, Simone had written. New family memories. She had traded 40 years of authentic memories for a staged photograph and a Mai Tai. I looked at their happy, sun-kissed faces and I felt nothing but a profound and chilling pity. They were celebrating a battle completely oblivious to the war they had already lost. The phone call came 2 days before they were due to return. I answered and was immediately hit by the sound of poolside music and distant laughter. Daddy Simone's voice was unnaturally cheerful. We were just thinking about you. It's so beautiful here. You would love it. I'm glad you're having a good time, Simone, I said, keeping my voice flat. Are you behaving yourself in the new place? She asked, her tone the one a mother uses on a particularly difficult child. Are you making friends? Before I could answer, Preston's voice boomed onto the line. Isaiah, good to hear from you, old man. Just wanted to give you a final update. The 970 officially cleared. The funds are secure in the new account. See, we told you we'd handle everything. You just put your feet up and enjoy your retirement. You've earned it. He was congratulating himself for robbing me and congratulating me for being robbed. The sheer audacity of it was almost magnificent. He who had never built a thing in his life was telling me, a man who had built a home with his own 2 hands, that I had earned this empty little room. I said nothing. My silence was a void he was desperate to fill with his own self-importance. Well, we've got to run, he said finally. Big dinner reservation. You take care now, you hear? The line went dead, leaving me in the suffocating quiet of my apartment. I looked out the window at the brick wall of the building next door. They thought they had sealed my fate, locked me away in a tidy little box where I could be forgotten. They thought the game was over. They were right. The game was over. They just didn't realize they had been playing for the wrong team all along. The call came 2 days before they were due to return. I was sitting on the edge of the lumpy mattress in my new apartment, staring at the water stains on the ceiling when my phone buzzed. It was Simone's number. I answered and was immediately assaulted by the sound of crashing waves and faint festive music. Daddy Simone's voice was a little too loud, a little too bright. We were just thinking about you. We wanted to make sure you were all settled in. I could hear Preston take the phone. Isaiah, how's the retirement life treating you? He boomed, his voice slick with false bonhomie. Listen, just wanted to give you the final update. The wire transfer for the 970 went through without a hitch. The funds are secure. Everything's been moved into the new managed account. It's all taken care of." I said nothing. My silence was a canvas, and he was eager to paint his masterpiece of condescension upon it. "You know, for a minute there I thought you were going to be difficult about this," he continued, letting out a self-satisfied chuckle. "But you did the right thing, the smart thing. This is better for everyone. Now you have a secure nest egg, no more worries about property taxes or a leaky roof, and we have the capital we need to build a real future for this family, for your grandchildren." He paused, and I could almost feel him smiling through the phone. "See? We told you we'd take care of you. You just put your feet up, play some bingo, and enjoy your golden years. You've earned it." He, a man who had never earned an honest dollar in his life, was telling me what I had earned. The arrogance was a thing of terrifying beauty. It was the final confirmation I needed. He wasn't just blind, he was proud of his blindness. "Thank you for the update, Preston," I said, my voice even and calm. "No problem at all. We'll got to run. The tide's coming in and we've got a surfing lesson. You take it easy now, you hear?" The line went dead, leaving only the sound of the dripping faucet in my kitchenette. I hung up the phone. He thought he had put me in a cage. He didn't realize he had just locked himself in one. The tide was indeed coming in, but it wasn't for him, it was for me. They returned on a Sunday, their skin tanned from the Hawaiian sun, their faces glowing with the smug satisfaction of a mission accomplished. They drove their gleaming sedan through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, not with nostalgia, but with the detached curiosity of tourists. I imagine Preston was pointing things out to Simone, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look at that, they still haven't fixed that sidewalk. Good thing we got your father out when we did. This whole area is about to be a gold mine." They pulled up in front of my house, the house that was no longer mine. They got out a pair of conquering heroes returning to the site of their victory. Preston jingled a set of keys in his hand. "Let's take one last look around," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Make sure the new owners know what they're getting." It was an act of pure arrogance, a final gloat over a man he thought he had defeated. He walked up the familiar porch steps, the same steps I had built with my own two hands, and slid the key into the lock. And then the first note in their triumphant symphony sounded wrong. The key didn't turn. He jiggled it. He pushed. Nothing. The lock was different. "What the hell," he muttered, his annoyance growing. "Did the new owners change the locks already? They weren't supposed to take possession until next week." "The nerve." Simone came up behind him, a frown creasing her brow. "That's not right, Preston. They would have had to tell us." It was only then, as they stood there frustrated and confused, that they finally looked up. They finally saw the bigger picture. Their eyes, which had been focused on the small victory of the front door, were now forced to take in the entire scene. And the scene had changed. A tall chain-link fence, the kind used for major construction sites, now surrounded the entire property, and beyond it they could see similar fences running down the entire length of the block, encircling the homes of my old neighbors. Then Preston saw the sign. It was massive, professional, staked into the center of the lawn, where Ruby's rose bushes used to be. The colors were a bold, corporate blue and silver, and the words on it hit them with the force of a physical blow. "Future site of the Cedar Park Preserve, a Viridian Dynamics development." The name hung in the air between them, a name that every real estate developer in Atlanta knew and feared. Viridian Dynamics. They weren't just builders. They were kingmakers. They didn't buy houses. They bought entire zip codes. Viridian Simone whispered, her voice trembling. "What? What are they doing here?" Preston was speechless. His face had gone from a healthy tan to a sickly pale white. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. He was scrambling for an explanation, his clever mind trying to piece together a puzzle whose picture he had never even seen. The buyers. They must have flipped it to them. Instantly. But how? The value. A deal like that would take months. He was a man drowning in a reality he couldn't comprehend. His small, tidy world of million-dollar house flips had just collided with a $30 million corporate acquisition. He stared at the sign at the fence at the house that was suddenly a fortress he could not enter. The vacation was over. The nightmare was just beginning. Preston stared at the sign, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The confident master of the universe persona had completely vanished, replaced by the raw, ugly face of panic. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. "No, this isn't possible." Simone grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of his expensive jacket. "Preston, "What is happening?" she cried, her voice rising with hysteria. "What is that sign? Why is there a fence around our house?" He shook her off, his eyes wild as he scanned the street. "It's not our house anymore, don't you get it?" He spat, his voice a venomous hiss. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to the world, to the universe that had just betrayed him. The buyers, they must have had a backroom deal with Viridian. They used us. I'll sue them. I'll sue Viridian. This is illegal. "You were so sure," Simone shrieked, the blame starting to poison her tone. "You said he was a confused old man. You said you had everything under control." He rounded on her, then his face a twisted mask of fury. "Me. This is your family. This is your senile father. You were the one who was supposed to manage him. You told me he was on board. He was—" She stammered, her own mind racing back, replaying every conversation, every sad nod, every quiet sigh. He was so agreeable, so defeated. A new, more terrifying thought began to dawn on her face, a horror far worse than losing the money. "Oh my God, Preston," she whispered, her eyes wide with the terrible revelation. What if he wasn't defeated? What if this was what he wanted all along? Their panicked argument was cut short when Preston's eyes fixed on something on the new front door. A single white envelope taped neatly in the center. There, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "There's a notice. A permit. Something." He scrambled through a gap in the fence, ignoring Simone's cry for him to wait, and ripped the envelope from the door. His hands shook as he tore it open. It wasn't a permit. It was a single sheet of heavy, expensive paper with the imposing logo of Viridian Dynamics embossed at the top. The text was not a suggestion. It was a declaration, a corporate tombstone. His voice was hollow as he read it aloud. Legal notice of ownership. As of October 28, 2025, the property designated as Lot 247, along with all adjoining parcels contained within the Cedar Park Community Trust, are the exclusive legal property of the Viridian Dynamics Development Corporation. He paused, swallowing hard. This area is now an active construction site. Access is restricted to authorized personnel only. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The paper trembled in his hand. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding with a new buyer. This was a corporate annexation, a hostile takeover executed with the cold, brutal efficiency of a military operation. They hadn't just been outmaneuvered. They had been annihilated. And they still had no idea who had pulled the trigger. As the cold legal words of the notice settled around them like a shroud, Simone spotted something else. Tucked behind the official document was a smaller, cream-colored note card. It was held in place by the same piece of tape. The handwriting on it was elegant, familiar, and steady. It was her father's. "Preston." "What is that?" she whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. He looked down, his eyes struggling to focus. He saw the note card, saw the familiar script, and a new wave of dread washed over him. He couldn't bring himself to touch it. Simone reached past him and pulled the card free. Her voice was a broken, shaking whisper as she read the words aloud. "Simone," she read, "thank you for helping me with the sale of the house. It was the final piece of the puzzle I needed to close my own deal." She paused, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at Preston, her eyes wide with dawning horror, and continued. "I hope the commission you and Preston made from the $970,000 sale helps you with your new beginning. Love, Dad." The words landed. Commission. My own deal. It was no longer a theory. It was a confession. A victory speech delivered in the calm, loving script of the man they had betrayed. He hadn't been a victim. He had been the architect. They were not conquerors. They were pawns. Simone's face crumpled, a sound of pure, soul-deep agony escaping her lips as she sank to her knees on the cold concrete. Preston stared at the note card in her hand, then at the massive Viridian sign, his mind finally connecting the two horrifying points. The sound started deep in his chest, a low groan of disbelief, and then it erupted. A raw, guttural scream of absolute ruin that tore through the quiet afternoon air, echoing down the street they had planned to conquer. I never saw Preston again. But in a city like Atlanta, a story like that travels. It travels in the quiet conversations between lawyers and the cautionary tales told to young, ambitious brokers and the gossip that flows like wine at fundraisers and country clubs. My friend Marcus Cole kept me informed not out of a desire for revenge, but out of a lawyer's appreciation for a well-executed case. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Preston's main investor, Henderson, was the first to call him. There was no yelling. Marcus told me just a cold surgical fury. You mean to tell me Henderson had set his voice a low, dangerous monotone that you were sitting on a $30 million land consolidation deal and you sold the key to it for less than $1 million because you failed to do a comprehensive title search on the trust? You didn't just lose my money, Preston. You lost an opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. Your career in this city is over. The lawsuits came next. Henderson and the other investors sued him not just to recoup their funds, but to publicly dismantle him. The charge was gross professional negligence. They argued that he had presented himself as an expert on the Atlanta market, yet had missed the single most important ownership detail of the property he was acquiring. It was an unforced error of such epic proportions that it became a joke in the very circles he was so desperate to impress. His name, once a symbol of aggressive new money success, became a punchline. He was the shark who had been outwitted by a retired history teacher. The visionary who couldn't see the forest for the single shiny tree. No one would trust him again. No bank would finance him. No investor would take his call. He wasn't destroyed by some brilliant complex scheme. He was undone by his own defining characteristic, his arrogance. He was so certain that I was a nobody, so convinced of his own superior intelligence that he never bothered to do the one thing a real professional would have done. He never bothered to read the history. Their marriage, a structure built on the flimsy foundations of ambition and lifestyle, couldn't withstand the earthquake. It crumbled quickly and ugly. The $970,000 commission they had so proudly secured became their only lifeboat, and it was riddled with holes. Preston's legal fees were astronomical. The investors he had charmed were now suing him with a vengeance, and his once powerful connections vanished overnight. The blame was a poison that seeped into every corner of their lives. Every conversation was a relitigation of their failure. If you hadn't been so greedy, so arrogant, Simone would scream, "He's my father. I told you he was stubborn." Stubborn Preston would lash back, his face contorted with a rage born of pure humiliation. "Your father is a Machiavellian genius, and you were his perfect little spy, weren't you? Crying your crocodile tears while he was planning this all along." Their beautiful minimalist house became a pressure cooker of debt and resentment. The life they had built, the one they had sold my home to protect, was liquidated piece by painful piece. The German sedan, the designer clothes, the country club membership, all of it vanished, sacrificed to pay the lawyers. They were left with nothing but each other, and they had come to despise the sight of one another. Theirs was a special kind of hell, one they had built together, brick by treacherous brick. 6 months later, I was not living in a penthouse suite or a sprawling mansion. I was standing in the cramped, dusty basement of the Cedar Park Community Library, surrounded by about 30 of my neighbors. The air smelled of old paper and hope. Outside, the sounds of construction from the new Viridian development were a constant humming reminder of the change that was coming. I stood behind a rickety podium, a single microphone carrying my voice to the small crowd. I wasn't there as a millionaire. I was there as Mr. Thomas, the retired history teacher. "Good afternoon, everyone." I began, my voice steady. "Most of you know me. I've lived on this block for nearly 50 years. I've watched this neighborhood grow and change. I've watched our children grow up and move away. And recently I've watched as the world has woken up to the value of our little corner of Atlanta." I let that word hang in the air. But there are two kinds of value. There's the value that a developer sees in a spreadsheet, a value measured in dollars per square foot. And then there is real value, the value of a neighbor who brings you soup when you're sick. The value of a story shared on a front porch on a hot summer evening. The value of a history that is written not in books, but in the foundations of our homes and the memories in our hearts. My wife, Ruby, I continued, my voice thick with emotion. She understood that kind of value better than anyone. She was a nurse, a builder, a guardian. She believed that a community's soul is not in its buildings but in its people and its stories. Before she passed, she made a promise with our neighbors to protect that soul. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, old friends and new residents. Today I am here to honor that promise. The recent sale of the Cedar Park Trust was not an ending. It was a beginning. I am proud to announce the creation of the Ruby Thomas Heritage Fund, and its first act will be to break ground right here on a new state-of-the-art library and community center fully funded to serve the children of this neighborhood for generations to come, a place where our history will be preserved and our future will be written. As the small crowd erupted into heartfelt applause, a wave of relief and gratitude washing over the room, my eyes scanned the faces before me. And then I saw her. Standing at the very back, half hidden in the shadows by the doorway, was Simone. She looked different, thinner. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, nondescript coat. The confident, entitled air she had worn like a second skin had vanished, leaving behind a woman who looked lost and fragile. She wasn't crying. Her face was a pale, still mask of regret. She made no move to come forward to speak to me. She just stood there watching a ghost at the feast of a life she had thrown away. Our eyes met across the crowded room. In that single, silent moment, a lifetime of unspoken words passed between us. I saw her shame, her sorrow, her desperate, unspoken plea. And she saw in my eyes not hatred, not anger, not even triumph. She saw a quiet finality. The door to the past, to the easy, unconditional love of a father she had taken for granted, was closed. But another door, a new one, remained slightly ajar. A door that could only be opened with time, with atonement, and with a profound, hard-won respect. I gave her a single, slow nod. It was not forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement, an ending, and a quiet, uncertain beginning. Then I turned back to my neighbors, to my community, to the future. I had taken back my home. I had secured my wife's legacy. But most importantly, I had taken back the pen. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one writing my own story. This whole experience taught me that you can build a very large house with money, but you cannot build a home. A true home, a true legacy, is built on a foundation of respect, love, and shared history. My son-in-law was so focused on the valuation of my property that he completely forgot its value. I have learned that a real inheritance isn't something you can find in a bank statement. It's the strength of a promise kept over decades, the history written in the walls of a community, and the dignity you refuse to surrender. That is the only fortune that truly lasts. For more stories about legacy justice and the quiet strength of those who are underestimated, make sure you subscribe to the channel.